Welcome to this technical deep dive into some of the background lore of the Hegira Contravention series. My name is Drew Wagar, and I'm the author of this series of space opera books. Now, of course, interstellar travel isn't based on any known physics that we have at the moment. Unfortunately for a space opera, you do need some way of providing for the ability to move between locales at a certain reasonable speed. There is interstellar travel in the Hegira universe, but it has significant restrictions which are kind of extrapolations of real physics. Now, ships travel between systems by use of what I call mesh gates. Now, these are mechanisms which can open a wormhole in one particular direction through which the ships navigate. Mesh gates are vast structures which are located on the edge of solar systems. They have to be a long way from gravitational interference as much as possible. Ships will approach these in much the way an aircraft would approach an airport. It would need to arrive in a pattern. It would need to gain permission to travel, and it would need to adjust its trajectory and its approach vectors to align with the mesh gate itself and get clearance to proceed. Travel through the gates is only possible by means of a navigator. This is a specially skilled individual who will actually allow the ship to navigate through the wormhole out to the other side. It's important to note that ships can't generate wormholes themselves. They require the gates in order to do that for them. The wormhole's open, the ship can then navigate through using its navigation host aboard. Now, a navigator is a very important role within Hegarian society. It takes an awfully long time to train to do that. It's a very complicated and significant role, and it's very rare. Therefore, it's very, very costly. So it's one of the big costs associated with interstellar travel in the universe. Once a ship has been given clearance and the navigator is aboard, it may approach the mesh gate, and the mesh gate will charge to open the wormhole, and the wormhole will allow transfer to the system in question. At the wormhole environment, there are facilities, space stations, refueling, provisioning, all sorts of things. They're major trade centres in their own right. They are owned by an organisation called the Guild, which has custodianship over these gates, which presents a political issue for spacefarers as well, as the Guild has effectively a complete monopoly on this form of transit. Now, the ship will approach the gate. Once the gate is charged, the wormhole will be opened. Now, the ship, as I've mentioned, hasn't got the ability to do this itself, but it does have power on board which is required to maintain the wormhole during the transit and also navigate through the wormhole once the wormhole has in fact been opened. Once the ship is in the process of transferring through the wormhole, its own energy supplies are maintaining the integrity of the wormhole, and the navigator on board is guiding the ship through the strange multidimensional nature of the wormhole itself. Now, the transit is fairly quick. The navigator will be doing some arcane mathematics and intuiting the process of the jump through the wormhole. But it allows me to have a mechanism whereby ships can transfer to alternative star systems at a reasonably rapid pace. Now, clearly this is an extrapolation based on physics as we understand it, but it's not entirely ruled out by the laws of physics as we understand them today. We would need exotic matter and possibly some very, very significant energy sources to do this sort of thing. The exact mechanicals of how you would create a wormhole, of course, aren't known. But we are dealing with a society here that is over 1,000 years in advance of what we have today in the 21st century. So I've allowed for the fact that these things have been discovered. But they have significant limitations, as I've already mentioned. Ships cannot do this process themselves. They must venture to a gate. And the gate provides an outbound only mechanism. Now, this has significant issues in terms of voyaging further out into the galaxy, because if you build a gate, the gate can take you outwards to a destination. But if there's no facility at the other end, there's no way for you to return. So if you, let's say, for example, you took a wormhole from Earth, and you wanted to go to, let's say, Sirius, if there's a mesh gate at Earth, you can take the trip to Sirius, but if there's no infrastructure in the Sirius system, there's no way for you to get back other than traditional sublight technologies. Now, this means that a mesh gate has to be built at the opposite end, which is clearly a significant financial undertaking for whatever organisation is footing the bill. And this is part of the economics of the Hegira universe, whereby the gates themselves are major construction projects which need to be built. A certain number of them have been, but the economy decides whether or not a gate is going to be built in any particular locale, because there has to be something at the other end that makes that economic activity actually viable. It also limits how far ships can go, because nobody wants to go to a system where there is no return mesh gate, because you're faced with either not returning at all, or you're faced with an extremely long sublight trip, which is going to require some sort of generation stroke sleeper activity depending on the type of ship that has made the jump. So most small owner-operator vessels and liners are only going to go where mesh gate systems are already set up, and that's a relatively limited series of worlds within the Hegira universe. I've postulated that's quite a limited amount of worlds, which keeps humankind in this story quite confined into a particular zone of the universe. There are different political factions, as some of the other videos will demonstrate, but they are confined into a relatively small amount of space where the meshgate infrastructure actually exists. I also mentioned that the ships need their own power supplies to transfer through the mesh gates. This also limits how far they can travel. If they run out of power whilst navigating the wormhole, they will drop out of the wormhole at some kind of indeterminate point in real space, determined by how far down the wormhole they had travelled. Now, what this means is that ships have range, and they have constraints on how far they can travel, depending on the amount of energy or fuel they can consume on board, which also provides a strict restriction over how the ships operate and gives you opportunities for further storytelling devices and so on and so forth. I hope you've enjoyed that little deep dive into some of the interstellar tech that's used in Hegira novels, and I look forward to the next video.